Hello, hello. Hopefully, you all can hear me. I'm going to tell you right now, this may definitely be a day where we get an appearance from my cat Oprah because I just picked her up from being out of town. So you may hear a couple meows today for sure, but hopefully, she'll take a little time to take a little rest. But welcome to the Legal Hour for December 2025. And we are going to be discussing our top 5 issues going into 2026. If your year has been anything like mine, it has been a lot. It's been a difficult year for sure. But one of the things that I used to do when I would have my radio show locally in Benton Harbor, shout out to 105.3 WBBH, is that I would spend December's show usually talking about the things that I see as being the top things that were going to be the legal issues for the coming year. So I wanted to keep that tradition going now that I'm doing this live stream podcast and talk about the top 5 issues that I see in my areas of practice for the year of 2026, things that we need to keep on our radar, things that you need to be thinking about, and things that you need to be talking to your family about. That's a lot of what we're going to be discussing today, is the things that I think that you really need to discuss with your families as we go forward into the new year. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you should be able to put your questions into the chat or either one of those platforms if you're watching live. And then, of course, the videos will be on YouTube because Facebook takes them off. I'm going to try to link them on there, but you can go onto YouTube and put in questions if you're watching this after the live stream has aired. I also post them to my LinkedIn page as well as post them to the Law Office Facebook page. So if you have questions, make sure that you share either in real time on the live stream or later on. You'll be able to access the videos for sure on YouTube, but then I try to post them on LinkedIn as well as my Law Office Facebook page. All right, so let's get started because we have a lot to talk about. An hour goes by a little quickly, and since we've got 5 different topics, I do want to get into the different topics for today. So our first topic is in the criminal law realm. I practiced criminal law for years. I still do practice it every once in a while, even though it's not the bulk of my practice anymore. But I definitely have seen this issue happening a lot, and it is going to be an issue that we have to deal with, not just in the criminal law realm, but really in any type of law. This is something that I've seen significantly. I can think of at least 3 of my cases this year where there's been a piece of evidence provided by somebody and I show it to my client or I show it to one of the parties involved and they say, that's not real. I didn't post that. I didn't text message this. Somebody else created this. This is not something that I actually put forward. And so I started to look into it. And I actually had one of my students bring it up when I was doing mock trial this semester. And he was like, well, we were talking about how to get evidence in. And one of the questions for anybody who practices law knows when you're trying to introduce a piece of physical evidence, a video, a photo, you're supposed to ask, have there been any changes, deletions, alterations to this document or photo or video since you either created it yourself or last time that you saw it? And so I went through that pretty quickly because, in my life, I kind of go through that quickly now. And one of my mock trial students said, but what if it's been altered? What if somebody face tuned their face, or what if somebody took somebody out of the photo and did Photoshop? Like, how do you really determine whether or not the photo has been altered, changed, deleted in any way? And I'll be honest with you, after practicing law for almost 20 years, I hadn't really thought about that with AI, but it's absolutely the case. It's going to be very different now. When people say, has this been altered, even if it's somebody who did a little face tune on their picture before they posted it. Those are things that you do need to actually establish. And I think that we in the legal field for many years now have just been letting things in. Did you post this on your Facebook? Yes. When did you post it on your Facebook? 2 days ago. Okay. Does it look the same way that it did when you posted it? Yes. And then we get it entered into evidence. But that's not always been the case. That has not always been the case. What now seems like the ancient history. I remember when I first started practicing, especially in big criminal cases, big felony cases, murder cases, aggravated assault cases, child pornography cases, those kind of cases, back when I first started practicing law, you had to find somebody from Palo Alto at Facebook headquarters and send them a subpoena and have them come and testify. There was somebody whose job that was. to be able to say this was something that was put on Facebook. This is the number that we can show from the computer that it was posted to this person's account. We would actually have to have people come from AT&T and from Facebook and from MySpace and from all those different places to verify and authenticate the things that were getting introduced into court. Because it wasn't enough to just say, this is my Facebook page and I posted it. Back when these things first started, that was not allowed. We actually had to get the people from California most of the time to be able to come and testify that things were authenticated. Text messages, phone calls. We would have to have a person whose job it was to fly all over the country and verify data, and be able to show that things were actually validly on the social media platforms. And we did that for years. It was really until a lot of judges, like this judge, I think here that's in the story that I pulled from NBC News, the judges were getting upset because, in big cases where there's a murder, aggravated assault, child pornography, people were paying to bring the folks to be able to come in from Facebook and from AT&T to be able to testify as to what the evidence was. But in a lot of smaller cases, there wasn't the budget for that. And then, of course, when you get into the civil realm, if it's a divorce case or something of that nature, nobody was subpoenaing the proper person to come from Facebook to verify different posts. And a lot of the judges, magistrates, they were saying, we want to see the evidence. So if the person who posted it can authenticate it, I want it to come in. And so we started laxing a lot of those rules as far as how can a post or text messages or different things from different apps be verified. And so as long as somebody could say, yeah, I wrote that up, I posted it, it hasn't been any changes, deletions, corrections to it, that evidence started to come in. With a lot of the changes to AI and a lot of people saying, no, I didn't actually post that. Somebody made it seem like that came from my Snapchat or my TikTok. But it didn't actually come from me. One of the things that people have told me when I started to do the podcast and be on YouTube was you have to be careful because people, especially when you're putting yourself out there talking like I am now, people will take your voice, your mannerisms, and they can create you thinking that it's you saying something, giving legal advice that it's not really you saying that or doing that. And so we have to be very careful nowadays about how this looks as we go into new school evidence. And so the old days, we still send a lot of subpoenas. I just had a case involving children, a lot of my cases involving young people. The police are sending subpoenas to Snapchat, Facebook, Meta, and saying, preserve this evidence. It's kind of similar to what we have here back in 2010, which is something that I was familiar with from my early days of practicing law. But now they're saying, preserve the evidence. Then we can go through it and then we can try to authenticate it once it gets here. But, we're going to have to go back to the old school way of preserving evidence and then determining whether or not the actual images are real or if they're AI generated or if they're AI enhanced in some way. And that's going to be really important in being able to get evidence into court and being able to properly discuss evidence in court as we go forward. And so this is something that I really do think for those who practice criminal law, but really in all realms of the law, we're going to have to actually authenticate it. Just because you get something as evidence and they say your client posted this, you need to make sure your client actually looks at it. And then you need to say, did you actually post this? Did you actually text this? Did you Snapchat this? So for some of my fellow attorneys who are not as technology inclined, you got to figure out a way to make sure that if they're saying, no, I didn't actually post that, or I said this, but I didn't say this part on this text message chain, you need to make sure to check and say, how is it going to be authenticated to actually be able to come into evidence? How are we going to verify that this is actually what happened in this text message chain or on social media? And so I think that's a big issue that we're going to be looking at in 2026 and then ongoing even past 2026. So that's one of my topics. I'll put that at number 5. We'll do the countdown to number 1 because that's kind of how I put it on my flyer. So my number 5 issue is AI generated images, particularly in criminal cases, but I think just in general in cases, we're going to have to do a better job of authenticating images and determining where they actually came from. My next issue is number 4, but I definitely don't think it is number 4. All of these issues are really important to me and things that I'm seeing a lot, and I think are going to be things that we see a lot going into 2026 and further on. But many of you will know I practice in the child welfare space. I represent children as a lawyer, guardian ad litem, who are in foster care. But this is an issue that I see for children, whether they be in foster care or not. I also represent children in guardianship cases. I represent children in child custody cases. I do a lot of representation of children. And also, I teach students, college students. And one of my classes I taught was the American presidency this past semester. And the final project that my students did is they were to be the president, and then they gave their State of the Union speech. You know, you're the president. What are the things that you want to see in our country as it currently stands? And my students were on a wide variety of political spectrum, the entire spectrum of political, from apolitical to, very liberal to very conservative. I have all of them as my students at the university. But every single one of them mentioned the need to focus on mental health. Every single one of my students, regardless of their political leanings, said that we needed to do more to address mental health of young people, children their age, young people their age, our 20-year-olds, all the way down to younger children. Everybody said that mental health was important. A lot of the changes that we see coming to health insurance, because that's how we pay for mental health care and mental health treatment, is going to impact the mental health treatment of children. So this is definitely a topic that is going to really need to be looked at in 2026 and as we go forward, in regards to how we pay for mental health care for kids, as well as the types of mental health care that we are able to give to children. So was able to find some statistics just to show you how important this issue is, and not just for children who are in foster care, children who are experiencing divorce, grief, loss, and trauma in many different realms. The current statistic is that 2 out of 3 children after they reach the age of 16 are reporting that they had at least one traumatic event by the time they turned 16 years old. So the majority of our children have at least one event that they consider to be traumatic by the time they turn 16. And a lot of the brain study science and different things that we show is that for many times, children's brains can be stuck at the age of which they experience their first trauma. So if that trauma is the death or loss of a caregiver at the age of 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, sometimes they can be stuck in that if they're not able to process the grief of losing that person. There's been a lot of death and grief for everybody in the last many years, and we are really looking at these post-COVID kids, a lot of the kids who had 2 years of their life completely changed at one way or another, who are now becoming adults, who are now, really dealing with a lot of the different grief and trauma. So that, statistic of 2 out of 3 kids reporting at least one really traumatic event in their life by the age of 16 is really important. And they need to be able to receive services to address that. Currently, and this is a 2020 statistic from the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's a little bit dated, but I think the numbers still, I think we have more of an increase rather than a decrease. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, that's kind of our big one now every year. Autism, ADHD, we get these different things that people make focuses on. And then sometimes the focus goes away, but it doesn't change the fact that the kids still have the disorders or that the kids still have the trauma. So I don't want to forget it. But as of 2020, at least 4.2 million children in the United States were diagnosed on some spectrum of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Behavioral or conduct. The number of children who I represent who have been diagnosed with a conduct disorder, they're diagnosing personality disorders earlier and earlier. I've had several 13 or 14-year-olds in the last 12 months who have been diagnosed with a personality disorder that previously had a conduct disorder when they were younger, are coming back and finding out. I have kids who I represent in delinquency cases, who I used to represent in foster care, who they are now saying have conduct disorders. Anxiety, 1.8 million children with diagnosed anxiety. So think about all the children who have anxiety that is not diagnosed. I think you probably then get up to some of those higher things, such as the conduct problems or attention deficit. And then depression, 1.3 million children. And again, I think that anxiety and depression numbers, again, those are the ones who have been diagnosed. I think that number is actually quite higher. A lot of our high functioning kids who do really well, I was one of these kids, to be quite honest with you, get good grades, in a bunch of sports, in a bunch of activities. When I finally did get diagnoses of anxiety and depression in my 30s, it was like, yep, I've been doing all those things since I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And so, I think there's a lot of kids, even those who are considered high functioning, who are dealing with anxiety and depression. For me, it was the loss of my grandmother at 10, and then my aunt at 14, and a lot of a large, wonderful family, but then a lot of people who had passed away, and how I dealt with that, and what we were able to know to do to be able to address kids who had those kind of traumatic experiences happen to them, and how they then end up exacerbating themselves sometimes in the classroom or relationships. And now we have social media. So that added layer of kids dealing with all of these issues who now have access to social media to tell them, in some ways they think teaching them about what's going on with them, and that may not be the correct way in order to teach them about it. They're now getting access to a lot of this information. We have to make sure that they're actually getting access to professionals who can work with them, know what's going on with them to be able to address their issues, as opposed to them reaching out in other ways in order to get that information. But that's not easy. That's not an easy thing to do. This graphic I found, that is from, I think, 2017, that talks about some of the statistics of the costs for children who do have some of the diagnoses that we just talked about in the last slide. And this says that over 32 million children covered by Medicaid, out of those, 1 out of every 10 use behavioral health care services. Now, remember that 1 out of 10 statistic with the 2 out of 3 statistic of kids who have had a traumatic event by the age of 16. Over 1/3 of all those costs of the children on Medicaid total about $30.2 billion. And again, this might have been 2020, somewhere between 2018, 2020. So think about what that is now. So the expenditures for kids who are dealing with diagnosed mental health issues, is much higher. We have a lot of changes that are coming down regards to Medicaid funding and health insurance in general. If you did not know, right now, most health insurance allows for there to be at least 5 to 10 sessions of therapy for a child for mental health. So that is included in pretty much every health plan that currently exists for a child, whether that be Medicaid or private insurance. So if you are seeing some issues with your child that you want to address, and some of those things you might not think are involved with mental health. I really like this graphic here as well, that talks about some of the things, and this is from Wisconsin's Office of Children's Mental Health Services. My child is having issues sleeping. My child is very irritable, always angry, or one of the that's always here, always alert. Either has super concentration or difficulty concentrating. Another one that I don't see on here that is really a big sign is eating issues. Feeding issues are such a big indicator of mental health issues with all people, not just children. But I have a case right now where the client is 3 years old and, is stuffing his face when he eats. And when we got him into a feeding therapist, which took a while because there's not a whole lot of feeding therapists in our rural area, they said, well, it's kind of conduct based. It's tied into some of the mental health and some of the trauma. And, for a lot of us involved in the case, lights turned on, like, oh, that makes sense. And I've had so many clients over the years, boys and girls, particularly between the ages of 10 and 13, who have issues with eating. I had one client, she was about 12 years old, and she would only eat skinless chicken breast. That was the only thing she would eat, and maybe like a vegetable with it. And, we finally got her into some classes to talk about nutrition and eating, because they were thinking, oh, she's 12 or 13, she wants to be thin. But it was really more, that was something she had control of. That was the one thing in her life that she was able to have control about, was her eating. And when it came down to it, she had a lot of things going on in regards to, she was in foster care at the time with a family member, but the split up of her siblings. And a lot of the different things going on in her life that she wasn't able to talk about with anybody else, she used that food as a way to be able to address it. So if there's a dietitian that's able to work with a child who's dealing with those issues, that's an area of mental health and physical health that should be covered under different services through insurance. Now, the problem that you're going to have is that a lot of agencies don't want to double dip. So if the school is providing some services and then the doctor's office is providing other services, what you're going to get is, well, we can't allow for this service to happen because then that's going to double dip into the funds or the money for these other services. So you as a parent, you have to be really careful, or as a foster parent, or as a caseworker, need to be very careful when you're talking with the different service providers about, these different questions that are on number 3 here on the slide. Are you taking new patients? Do you accept this type of insurance? If not, do you help accept self-pay or a sliding scale? What are you looking at as far as appointments and availability for appointments? What are the different things that I can do in order to get my child these services? If your student is on an IEP or a 504 plan at school, what services are available through the school that can then be incorporated into their plan? So that young lady who had eating issues, even if she didn't have any cognitive issues at school, would a 504 plan in regards to eating be able to help her be able to, not have an issue where she's not eating lunch? If she's not eating lunch and not eating breakfast because they don't have the one thing that she eats, how is she able to concentrate and then be able to do what she needs to do for school? So a 504 plan that would allow her to be able to bring a lunch or have a nutrition class or be able to do something else is going to be able to help address this mental health issue that is then impacting her ability to have the proper education. And that doesn't mean if she was getting A's and B's, it still could potentially be impacting her education. The social aspect of her education is important. All these different things that we're looking at. And particularly when you have a student who then is facing suspension, expulsion, a lot of different issues at school, you need to tap into these mental health services before they're coming up for expulsion or suspension. We definitely need to be making sure that, everybody is asking these questions. And if it comes down to, oh, well, they can't do this. Why? Oh, it's a double dipping issue. It's an insurance issue. Find another way to pay for it. Because it's not that the child doesn't need it. It's just that we don't know how to pay for it. And that's not an acceptable reason not to have a child have a service. But you really have to have advocates to be able to make sure that children are getting these different services. And you're going to have to be doing it even more now than ever because of the issues that we're having as far as the changes to health insurance. And all those changes haven't happened yet. A lot of them we're not going to start seeing until January 1. So that's why I put it on as one of my issues to be able to discuss, because this is going to be a big issue for 2026 and beyond as far as how these different mental health services for kids end up getting paid for. All right, issue number 3, also dealing with our young people, but all of our young people. And obviously we see that there are going to be a lot of changes when it comes to paying for school. And that's not just for college. That includes kids who may go to private schools. It includes trade schools. Many of our young people now, even students, I worked many years ago at a special education school in the DeKalb County School District in Georgia that allowed students to go out to work. And all of them were on IEPs. So, students who have special needs can still get different opportunities to be able to do trades and, be able to become CNAs, auto mechanic. There are all different types of programs at that school. And we're going to see a whole lot more of that happening. I have a lot of my clients in foster care and guardianship cases who are dual enrolled in college classes. But now for a lot of young people, even if they're able academically to be able to do these different things, or they have a particular skill like auto mechanic and different things to be able to get additional training, then the next question is, how do we pay for it? How are we going to be able to make sure that they have all of the different items they need to be able to go to school, books, where are they going to live? Because okay, maybe we can use this money for tuition and that's wonderful, but How are they going to stay at home? Are they going to be able to afford rent? What are the different things that can happen in order to make sure that children are able to get some type of education and training in a skill, whether that be something that requires zero college or 8 years of college, all the way up. These are things that we need to be thinking about when children are very young. So there's going to be some caps on what parents can get as far as scholarship. There's going to be caps on what students can get as far as scholarships. So those professional degrees, such as a JD, an MD, those are going to still be capped at $200,000. Anybody who watched my show last month saw that the average cost of law school is over $200,000. So once you get to that $200,000 cap, what are you going to do in order to be able to fill that middle part of it, or the rest of it, in order even to get a professional degree? And some of those degrees that are now no longer considered professional, like nursing, advanced teaching degrees in general, medical assistant, physician's assistant, those are capped at $100,000. So if you know that you have a young person who is interested in going into the medical field, and they're not going to become a medical doctor, scientist, or something of that nature, you're going to have to be able to help them with the saving beforehand, because they're going to be capped at how much they can take out as far as loan money, to be able to even get their education to become a therapist or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, our young people who are going to be going into the trades, they need to be able to buy supplies, books, different things that they need to do in order to be able to access their education. Here in Michigan, we do now have 2 years of free community college, which is great, but you still have to buy books. You still have to live somewhere. You still have to have transportation to get to campus. There's still a whole lot of other things that are going to be needed in order to do that. And that includes, our local college now has a police academy that's, really free to attend, but, you have to be able to get there. You have to be able to survive and live while you're training to be able to get the career. So it's important for parents, grandparents, the kids themselves to know about the different savings options that you have if you're going to be capped out at the ability that you're able to loan in order to for a child to be able to have an education. So this is just a reminder. So these are federal plans in many situations, but your state may be different. So you want to look into your local bank, credit union. If you have a financial advisor that you're using, then you need to ask them about these different types of plans. The 529 plan is oftentimes what people think about. There's some tax advantages to a 529 plan. You can put money in that and not have to pay tax on it. But there are some different things with the 529 plan as well. It has to go directly to school education. In some states, it's restricted only to colleges. So if you have a child who goes to a trade school or a police academy or something of that nature, it might not cover that. Cosmetology, things of that nature, it might not cover those things depending on the way that the plan is set up and then able to be used in the states that you're in. A Cloverdale account also can pay for private education, private school at a younger level. So preschool, elementary school, high school, Cloverdales can cover some of that as well. 529s can as well in some places, but again, that depends on your state. So you need to talk to your bank or financial advisor about those different things. But there's some other options on here that I don't think get talked about enough as far as different savings plans for college for kids. So you have your U accounts, as I call them. So the adult has the decision-making ability, but the actual money belongs to the child. So you put the money in there, and for anybody, I serve as a conservator on some accounts. So I go in and I can make deposits and withdrawals on behalf of my client, but that's their money. It's their name by, or on the behalf of, it's them by me. So it's not my bank account, but I have control over the assets in the bank account, but the money does not belong to me. I can't go and say that that's my asset. It is that person's money. And so that's very important if you have a situation, because some of these U accounts, UGMAs and UTMAs, can also be used for things other than just education. So they could be used for health insurance. They could be used for transportation. Again, depending on the state, you need to talk to the bank or the financial advisors. But these are other accounts that the adult can, put their money into. Other adults can put money into for that young person, but the money belongs to the child. There's a lot of tax things that go with children having that money, though. So again, these are different things that you need to speak to somebody who understands the financial part of it and the tax implications of it as you're trying to figure out what's going to work best for your family and for your child. Roth IRAs are great because these you can open that are not connected to your job, or business or things of that nature that you can put money into. And then you can use the money that comes from the investment portion. The principal you can also take from, but then you're going to have to pay some taxes on that principal. But this is another way to put in money without paying tax on them that you can then save. So it can be invested into, it can go into, be rolled over. You might have heard that phrase from your different jobs. Then even into a retirement account, which is going to come into play later for some of us. So that if it's not used on education for the child, it could then be used potentially for retirement for somebody else, either the person who owns the account, a parent. Again, we're about to get into this a lot. But that's another option that allows for there to be savings and investment that doesn't specifically have to go to education. And then some of us have forgotten about CDs. CDs are, and I'm not talking about compact discs and changing into music. CDs are small savings. It's not the stock market for sure. You're not going to get, significantly high returns if something blows up, but you're also not going to lose a whole bunch of money. A CD is going to be a fixed rate of interest that comes in that will sit and gain money for someone. They're FDIC and credit union insured, that give you more interest back, then give you more savings that come from it than something like a high yield savings account. High yield savings accounts are also options now, and a lot of banks and credit unions are allowing children to open high yield savings accounts where they can't really touch that money. You can put it in the savings. They don't necessarily have access to it, but it will gain that money for them. So there's a lot of different ways of being able to save for college, trade school, cosmetology school, all of those different things. But if for some reason your young person, your student doesn't do that, then some of these other options besides 529 and Cloverdale's could then also be used for things like living expenses, and different things that they need in order to start their careers. And these are important too, because more and more, if you watch my video from last time about law school, young people might be graduating from undergrad and not going directly to the next level of getting another degree or going to get some type of certificate. They're working. And so they could then potentially, with the Roth, with the U accounts, with the CDs or high yield savings accounts, be able to use those things to help establish their living before they then go back to get that next degree. And because of these different caps and things that we now have on being able to get loans, we're probably going to see a whole lot more people doing that, a whole lot more students figuring out ways to supplement to be able to pay for their education because of the caps on their ability to spend. So these are a lot of different ways that we can make different savings for our young people so that they can have a leg up, and not be burdened with, 3, 4, 5, 6 figures of student loan debt. Or even be able to access it, because, some of these limits are going to keep them from even being able to pay fully for the education that they need. All right, we're into issue number 2. So I went down from 5. Now we're at issue number 2. Number 2 and number 1 are very connected. And like I said, it's been a tough year. I know a lot of people have been dealing with a lot of family issues. I listed this issue as a sandwich generation issue. I love this graphic, but there needs to be like more layers of bread here. And I think a lot of people, when they think about sandwich generation, they think about my group now. So I'm a Zennial. I'm right between Gen X and Millennial. I'm an elder millennial, Oregon Trail generation, all these people born like 80 to 83, we fall into this group, right? And I have friends who have newborns and who have grandchildren that are my age. So, a lot of times we have been told, all right, Gen X, millennials, you're the sandwich generation now. You're helping to care for your parents, and you're also helping to care for children. But it's much more expanded than that. People are living longer. People are dealing with a lot. So I know some people in my age generation who are taking care of parents, grandparents, children, and grandchildren. So, like I said, it's a double decker sandwich at this point. And not only that, there are older Gen X friends and baby boomers whose parents are still living, and so they're taking care of their parents as well as children and grandchildren. And so I don't want to forget about that generation who are still, in many cases, doing some sandwiching as far as the people that they're caring for. And sometimes they're caring for their grandchildren because their children are not able to care um, for their grandchildren. And so we have multiple layers of sandwich generations right now. And so we all need to really sit down and figure out what happens because, and this has happened even in the last couple of weeks with several clients of mine, people who I know, people in the community, the caregivers are getting sick. The caregivers are passing away. The children are passing away who were taking care of the parents. The spouse who was doing really well and taking care of the other spouse or sibling or cousin or whatever the case may be, they end up having a stroke or a heart attack. And then either they're disabled and can't take care of the other person or they pass away first. Many of you have those situations that are happening in your lives right now. And so we have to start having conversations. My mother is not afraid to have the conversations. For those who don't know, many of you already do know, in November of 2024, my mom had a stroke. And then in March of this year of 2025, my father passed away. And I'm an only child. And I was actually sitting in the hospital with my mother last November when I said, oh, my mom is my decision maker. She's not able to do that anymore. And I had to sit down and change all my plans. And I had to talk to my friends and my cousins and say, hey, guess what? If something happens to me, I need you to do these things. And my mom reminds me all the time, well, what if something happens to you? Then who's going to take care of me? And, it gets kind of annoying that she keeps asking me that, but it's important that she does. And it's important that we have the conversation. And I have had the conversation with her. Well, if something happens to me, this is who's making decisions for me. And you already have documents about who's going to be making decisions for you. And they know what to do to help whoever that person is. But we have to have those conversations because something could happen to me. I could get in a car accident. I could get sick. And then who is going to help take care of my mother because I'm doing a lot of that taking care of financially and with her, knowing all her medications and everything else right now. And, I do that. But my goodness, all of my generation who also have children, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. And so we as families have to have these conversations in 2026. We have to have these conversations. If something happens to the person who's providing the care for everybody else, what's going to happen? And we can't wait until the big situation happens. We have to start planning now. So powers of attorney, medical directives, they may be called different things in your state. You need to sit down with somebody and start talking about these things. And, people who know me know that I'm not a big fan of trusts. But you may hear some changes from me in that as we go over the next couple of years. Because I have seen, both dealing with my mom and dealing with my dad, who had documents because I created them, that there's still a lot of challenges when you go to the banks, when you go to the doctor's offices, when you deal with a lot of other things, even when you have those documents. And that's as somebody, I very specifically remember going to the bank after my mom had the stroke. I was already on a lot of her different things, but the ones that I wasn't, I gave them the power of attorney. And the first question that the girl asked is, well, was this created by a Michigan attorney? And I saw her reaching for the, company that they partner with in order to do such and such. And I said, yes, it was me. And she kind of looked at me and was like, oh, okay. And that changed the conversation. But a lot of the folks at the banks and credit unions are being told to kind of push the products that are working with their banks. And I've had clients call me and say, well, you did this document for me and the bank is saying that they're not going to take it. I live in a small town. I pick up because usually I know somebody that works at the bank, and I call and I say, what is the problem? And then it gets fixed. But that's not going to work for everybody. So we as estate planning attorneys and probate attorneys need to have a better understanding about how these banks are, dealing with, in Michigan, a durable power of attorney that only comes into effect when somebody is not able to make decisions for themselves. A lot of banks in Michigan don't like them. They don't want to follow them. In fact, I had an issue when my father was alive with the document that I created, going to a bank where I didn't know anybody. And I had to go through the whole process. And that was because I was trying to find care for him when he came home on hospice. And that's another thing that you all need to talk about, because in the end, I found that help through the VA. The VA social worker was an amazing person to help me through, as well as the veterans person with my county, helped me navigate and guide a lot of the resources that I had no idea were available through the VA. And so some of our older generations, especially men and women who served, you need to make sure that your children, grandchildren, spouses know what's available, in-home care, all those different things to be able to assist, and put that into your plans. Talk about it, understand it. Make it a little bit easier for the people in the sandwich who are having to take care of children, grandchildren, parents, grandparents. Okay, let's have these discussions in 2026. Don't leave it until when something, the bottom falls out. And, this is really important too. My last topic, number one, I almost made the entire show about this. Long-term care planning. Now, I just told you all that I am interested in talking a little bit more about trusts in 2026. And I am. And I know a lot of you come to me and say, I saw this on TikTok, I saw this on Facebook, I saw this on Instagram, all these different things that come up now about trusts. But a trust deals with your property. Okay? So, yeah, if you put all your house, car, bank accounts in a trust, great, cool, wonderful. What if you have a stroke? What if you have a heart attack and you have to go to a rehab facility? You're still alive. People live many years after strokes now, after heart attacks, hip replacements, knee replacements, all those kind of things. But there is a very, very high likelihood in the world that we live in today that somebody who is in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s is going to have to do at least some portion of time in some type of rehabilitation facility. And in case you didn't know, those rehabs cost $10,000 a month. Minimum. So, I know that a lot of people in my mom's age range and like maybe early Gen Xers, there was a lot of discussion of like long-term care insurance. You don't see that as much now. It still exists. People don't talk about it enough, but, there was some changes to that after Obamacare came into place, because for a lot of people, they were being denied different things. So for instance, I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 30 or 31 years old. I would not have been able to get a long-term care insurance plan after that point. It was too late. But there are people who still do have these long-term care options that are available to them. But if you do not, what other things do you have into play to be able to pay for long-term care? And a trust is not going to deal with any of that. And who is going to help you make the decisions? I tell people this all the time who come to me. You might have a daughter who's a nurse or a son who's a nurse. And so you say, well, clearly they're the one who's going to be making medical decisions for me. But if you haven't talked to them, you might talk to them and they'll say, I can make the decision for everybody else, but I can't make it for you. I have way too much emotionally involved with you as my parent to be able to do that. So no, I don't want to be the person to make that decision. I think it should be the oldest child, or I think it should be the youngest child who thinks they run everything anyway. When I talk about that discussion with the sandwich generation, please have these discussions with your spouse, with your children, with your parents. And, Baby boomers, I love y'all. I promise you I do. But you all are some of the most stubborn people. And I say this dealing with my own parents as well as my clients, because I represent a lot of kids, but I also represent a lot of older folks who are in guardianships and different things of that nature. You worked hard. We respect you. We love you all. You did good. Let somebody help you. Please. Please let somebody help you. And in order to do that, you have to find somebody who you trust. And I absolutely understand that. But you have to let somebody help you put these things together in case, especially if you want to stay at home. If you want to stay at home and not have to go to a facility, then you need to be talking to somebody about what that looks like. Who's going to help you if you're not able to move around to take care of your home the way that you need to get it taken care of? What are things that you need to do to your home now to make it so that you can stay in your home longer? When my mom decided that she was going to have her knee replacement, we got the bathroom redone. We got the stair climber little chair thing to go up and down the stairs. Those kind of things are going to make it much more easier for her to be able to stay in her home, and bring people in order to help. But if you are currently living in a 3-bedroom house and your bedrooms are on the 3rd floor and it's working fine now, is it going to work fine for you to be able to stay in that home 10, 15, 20 years from now? You have to start thinking about what that looks like. And this stuff is not cheap. When I go back to that sandwich generation discussion, if you all decide to go into a 55 and up housing facility, we're getting older. This 3-bedroom, 3-floor house is too much for us. We want to go to something smaller. Well, if you go into a place that is 55 and over, and then you get to the situation where you need to be taking care of your grandkids or great grandkids, then you can't do that in that 55 and plus housing. So when we talk about long-term planning, we really do mean long-term. And so many of us are living into our 70s, 80s, 90s, over 100, that we really do want to think about these things. And we want to respect people who say, I want to stay at home as long as I can. I want to be at home. But when you're at home, you have to be at home and be safe. So what does that look like? Making sure, I will tell this story because I thank my dad so much. I had done his documents for him. And when my dad got sick and was at the hospital, I said, Dad, where's the blue folder? Because I always do different colors. I'm looking to see, I don't have it here in my house right now, but I actually do have his folder here, but I don't know if I can get to it quick. Here it is. I had his blue folder. And I said, Dad, where's the blue folder? And he told me exactly where it was in his house. And this was before he got to the point where he wouldn't have been able to tell me. And when I went and got his folder, it had all his documents in it, and he had put his insurance stuff. Everything I needed was in there, except for his discharge papers from the military, which was in his wallet. But everything was in there. And that made it so much easier for me to then do what it was that he wanted done. Because we had the discussion. I knew what my dad wanted. And even though that might not have been what I wanted, I knew what he wanted. And so I was going to do what he wanted. But stuff that I didn't even know he had put into that blue binder. So you have to have that. That's the way that that's how I knew what he wanted. That's how I knew when he kept talking about his phone and my family had gotten his phone. I knew he meant his Facebook phone, that I had put Facebook on for him, that he wanted that. That's because we talked, we knew little things. As much as my mom, says, well, what if something happens to you and she worries about me while I'm worrying about her? We've had the discussion. I know what to do. And now I'm having those discussions with my friends. If something happens to me, this is what you need to do. Planning is important. And it's more than just creating a trust because you saw it on TikTok. You need to be sitting down with financial professionals. And people come to me all the time, well, I don't have much. Well, guess what? That little bit that you do have, you want to keep it the way that you want it. And one thing that you might think is not worth much, but is worth a whole lot, is you yourself. So, have the discussion with your kids. Have a discussion with your parents, your grandchildren. If something happens to me, this is what I want to be able to be done. And if you do have the ability to have some money to put aside for things like long-term care insurance, or to be able to invest it, or to be able to, look into other ways to be able to take care of yourself if something happens to you and you're not able to live in the current situation in which you are living, start to plan for those things now. There's going to be a whole lot of talk from me about this. This topic will come up a lot in 2026 on this program, as well as a lot of different things that I'm planning for the coming year. But we really do need to start planning, having these conversations. And honestly, I think that that goes with all of the topics that I've brought up today. Planning for education, planning for children's mental health, a lot of planning. So 2026 is going to be the year of planning. I think that's something that we really need to be looking into as we go forward into the new year. I have not done a good job to see if there's any questions. I don't think I have any questions. I did see a couple people liking. Thank you. Sharing. Thank you. Again, if you do have questions, this will be up immediately on YouTube, and I will put it up on my LinkedIn. It will be on Facebook for a while. I need to figure out a way to make them stay on Facebook, but you're always able to go to the law office's YouTube page to be able to look at the show and view past shows. If there's topics that you all are interested in hearing going into 2026, please let me know. Those of you all who have asked me about the polls, I used to put up a poll and say, are we going to do this topic or this topic? I do plan to bring that back in 2026 so you all can vote on the different topics that we hear about. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming down the way that we're going to be talking about. Changes to the scheduling of marijuana federally is one that I have a potential show planned on, because that's going to make a big difference. You're going to get a whole lot, like I said, on estate planning and probate over the next couple of years. And every time, see, I got water this time. Last time I almost had a coughing fit. We're going to be talking a whole lot more about insurance and business. So different topics that you all have for me, let me know as we go into 2026. Ashley, I see you. Thank you. So I will stop my live stream now, because I think the coughing is also the way of saying you've been talking too long. So go ahead and be done with the show today. So thank you again. These are my top 5. Again, share, comment, but more than anything, have the conversation. Talk with your family, talk with your friends, make a plan. 2026 is going to be the year of the plan. So I look forward to helping you all in any way that you can, praying for everyone, because like I said, it's been a hard year. But we have made it through 2025, and we're going to plan our way to doing what we need to do to get into 2026. So have a safe, happy, healthy new year. Plan and care about each other. Please. We've got to do that. Take care of each other and be open to having the conversations with the people who care about you in order to be able to help you live the life that you want to live, to be able not to just survive, but to thrive. So we're going to plan to thrive in 2026. All right, everyone. Thank you and have a great night.